A hedgerow in Normandy, July of 1944. The German position is 40 yards away, and it is invisible. You cannot see the machine gun crew, but you can hear them. That long, tearing rip of an MG-42, the sound men called the zipper, 1,000 rounds a minute fired in bursts that never seem to stop. Your squad is pinned in the dirt, and the only thing standing between them and annihilation is the man lying behind the Browning automatic rifle. He sights in. He fires. The weapon barks, heavy, deliberate, 30 caliber rounds slamming into the hedge line. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, he owns that piece of the war. He is the loudest voice in the squad, the one weapon that can answer a German machine gun. And then the bolt locks back. Empty. 20 rounds. Gone. He rolls onto his side, fingers fumbling at his belt for the next magazine, and in that instant, that 2-second, 3-second instant when his weapon is silent, the Germans know. They have heard it before. They have counted. They know that the American gun has stopped, and they rise to fire, and the only thing the rest of the squad can do is press their faces into the French soil and pray that he reloads fast enough. This was the reality of the most famous automatic weapon America carried into the Second World War. Not a flaw in the legend itself. Because the Browning automatic rifle, the bar, was a magnificent piece of engineering that was sent to do a job it was never built to do. And on the front lines, in the hedgerows and the snow and the volcanic ash, that mismatch cost American lives. This is the story of how a brilliant design became a tactical compromise. And why, for the men who carried it, that compromise was anything but academic. If you love the real history of the weapons that shaped the men who fought, the truth behind the legend, sourced and verified, take a moment now to subscribe. We tell these stories the way they actually happened. Stay with me. To understand why the bar struggled, you have to go back to where it was born, and to the war it was born to fight. It was 1917. America had finally entered the Great War, and the Western Front was a frozen photograph of slaughter. 3 years of trench warfare had carved a scar across France and Belgium, an unbroken line from the Swiss border to the sea. Men climbed out of their trenches, walked into machine gun fire, and died in the thousands. The problem the generals could not solve was simple and terrible. How do you cross no man's land alive? The answer they reached for was a tactic called walking fire. The idea was that a soldier could advance across open ground while firing his automatic weapon from the hip. A continuous spray of bullets to keep the enemy's heads down, to suppress the trench line just long enough to reach it. For that, you needed a weapon a single man could carry and fire on the move. Not a heavy, water-cooled machine gun bolted to a tripod with a crew of 4. Something lighter. Something that walked with the infantry. John Moses Browning, the most gifted firearms designer in American history, answered that call. His Browning automatic rifle was a gas-operated, magazine-fed, selective fire weapon. It could fire one shot at a time or rip through a magazine on full automatic. It was rugged. It was reliable. By the standards of 1917, it was a near miracle of engineering, and it went from concept to the battlefields of France in a matter of months. The first bars reached the front in the final year of the war. But here's the thing about walking fire. It never really worked. The trenches it was designed to overcome were emptying, even as the bar arrived, and the tactic of strolling across open ground hosing bullets from the hip proved to be exactly as suicidal as it sounds. The war ended, and the weapon that had been designed for one very specific, very temporary battlefield problem did not end with it. The bar stayed in the American arsenal, and over the next 2 decades, the United States Army slowly, quietly handed it an entirely new job, one Browning had never designed it for. They decided the bar would become the squad's light machine gun. And that decision, reasonable as it must have seemed in a peacetime budget office, set the stage for everything that went wrong on the front lines a generation later. Consider the weapon itself. The most common version carried in the Second World War was the M1918A2. Empty, with its bipod attached, it weighed around 19 pounds. Load it with a full 20-round magazine, and you were carrying just over 20 pounds of steel and walnut. Now hold that number next to the rifle the rest of the squad carried. The M1 Garand, the standard American infantry rifle, weighed about 9.5 pounds. The bar was more than twice the weight of the weapon. Every other man in the squad was humping up the same hill. 20 pounds does not sound like much when you read it on a page. Carry it for 20 miles. Carry it up a ridge under fire. Carry it through the hedgerows of Normandy, through the frozen forests of the Ardennes, across the black sand of Iwo Jima. Carry it while the man next to you, with his 9-pound Garand, moves faster than you, ducks faster than you, gets to cover before you do. The barman was always the slowest in the squad. He was the one who could not keep up in the sprint between cover. And in combat, being a half-second slow to the ground is the difference between living and dying. So already we have a weapon caught between two worlds, too heavy to be a rifle. The men who carried it never forgot that weight. But if the price of that weight was supposed to be firepower, if you were carrying twice the load to be the squad's machine gun, then the firepower had better be there when it counted. And this is where we reach the heart of the failure. The magazine, 20 rounds. A light machine gun exists to do one thing above all others: lay down suppressing fire. Not to kill, though it will, but to dominate. To pour out such a continuous hammering volume of bullets that the enemy cannot lift his head, cannot aim, cannot move, while your riflemen maneuver to flank and destroy him. Suppression is the engine of infantry tactics. It is the thing that lets men cross open ground and live. And suppression depends on one quality above all: continuous fire. The bar could not give you continuous fire. With a 20-round magazine and a cyclic rate of 500 to 600 rounds a minute, a gunner who held the trigger down emptied his weapon in roughly 2 seconds. 2 seconds of fire, then the bolt locks back, then the reload, fumbling a fresh magazine from the belt, seating it, charging the bolt, and then 2 more seconds. The men who studied this honestly put the bar's realistic, sustained rate at somewhere around 75 rounds a minute. Not because the gun couldn't cycle faster, because the gunner spent more of the fight reloading than firing. Now picture what the enemy was bringing to that same fight. The German MG42 was belt-fed. It did not stop at 20 rounds, or at 50, or at 200. A loader fed a continuous belt of ammunition into a weapon that fired so fast, over 1,000 rounds a minute, sometimes far more, that the individual shots blurred into that infamous tearing sound. Where the bar gave you 2 seconds and a reload, the MG42 gave you a wall of lead that did not pause. And it wasn't only the Germans. Look at the British Bren gun. By most accounts, one of the finest light machine guns of the entire war. The Bren fed from a curved 30-round magazine, 50% more than the bar before reloading. And when it did need a fresh magazine, a second man on the gun crew handled it, keeping the weapon talking. The Bren was a true squad support weapon, served by a team, designed from the ground up for the job. The bar was a one-man gun trying to do a two-man job with a magazine built for a rifle. Think about what that did to the man behind it, not just tactically, but psychologically. He knew he was the squad's heavy hitter. He knew that when the firing started, the other men looked to his weapon to answer the enemy. And he also knew that he could only answer for 2 seconds at a time. Every burst was a countdown. Every reload was a window of vulnerability for everyone depending on him. He was carrying the heaviest weapon in the squad, the one everyone counted on, and he was forced to spend the most dangerous moments of every firefight with an empty gun in his hands and his enemy listening for the silence. That was the first failure. But it was not the only one. Because even if you could have fed the bar endlessly, even if you'd handed the gunner a bottomless supply of ammunition, the weapon would have destroyed itself trying to keep up. The bar had a fixed barrel. To understand why that matters, you have to understand what sustained automatic fire does to a gun. Every round fired dumps heat into the barrel. Fire long enough, fast enough, and that steel glows. It softens. The rifling, the spiral grooves that spin the bullet and give it accuracy, begins to wear and warp. Push it far enough, and the barrel can droop, distort, even fail entirely. Heat is the natural enemy of any weapon meant to fire continuously. The great machine gun designers all understood this, and they all solved it the same way: the quick-change barrel. On the MG42, a trained crew could swap a glowing barrel for a fresh one in seconds, then keep firing while the hot one cooled. The Bren had it too. The gunner, or his number two, could pull the overheated barrel and drop in a spare, and the most experienced crews even carried pre-sighted spares so the swap almost no accuracy. Overheating, for those weapons, was a problem with a built-in answer. You changed the barrel and kept fighting. The bar gunner had no such option. His barrel was part of the weapon. If it overheated, he could not change it. He could only stop. He had to manage his own rate of fire. Short bursts, deliberate pauses, a constant internal discipline, not to be more effective, but simply to keep his weapon from cooking itself into uselessness in the middle of a battle. In a prolonged engagement, the very moments when the squad needed maximum fire were the moments the gunner had to throttle back to save his gun. So now stack the failures one on top of another. A weapon too heavy to maneuver like a rifle, a magazine too small to suppress like a machine gun, a barrel that could not be changed, forcing the gunner to ration the fire his squad was depending on. Each limitation alone might have been survivable. Together, they meant that the one weapon in the squad designated to deliver overwhelming automatic firepower could not, in fact, sustain it. And the men who carried it lived inside that contradiction every single day. The bipod that was supposed to steady the weapon for sustained fire added weight and bulk without solving the magazine or the barrel. The carrying handle made it easier to lift, not easier to fight with. Every attempt to bolt the bar more firmly into the light machine gun roll added pounds to a soldier's load without fixing the two problems that actually mattered. The Army kept trying to make the bar into something it was not, and each modification was a heavier reminder of the gap between what the doctrine demanded and what the weapon could deliver. This was the burden of the bar man. He was, in a real sense, asked to be a machine gun crew compressed into a single exhausted human being, to carry the gun, feed the gun, manage the gun's heat, and provide the squad's base of fire, all by himself, all while keeping pace with riflemen carrying less than half his load. Some squads gave him an assistant to help haul magazines, but when the bullets flew, it was one man, one gun, 20 rounds at a time. And yet, and this is the part that the simple story of failure leaves out, the men loved it. Here is the truth that makes this history honest and richer than a list of flaws. Ask the veterans who carried the bar, and most of them will not tell you it failed. They will tell you it was the most reliable thing they owned. They will tell you it kept firing when other weapons jammed, that it ate the mud and the snow and the dust and kept working, that its heavy .30 caliber rounds hit with an authority nothing else in the squad could match. To the man in the foxhole, the bar was a friend. Many called it the most dependable weapon on the line. So when we say the bar failed, we have to be precise about what failed. The weapon did not fail. John Browning's design did not fail. What failed was the decision to take a 1917 automatic rifle, built for a tactic that didn't survive its own war, and assign it the role of a light machine gun 2 decades later, a role for which it lacked the magazine, the barrel, and the crew. The failure was not in the steel, it was in the category. The Army asked a superb automatic rifle to be a machine gun, and no amount of courage from the man behind it could close that gap. And the Army, eventually, admitted it. The proof is in what came after. The lessons of the front lines, the empty magazines, the overheated barrels, the lone gunner trying to do a crew's work, were written into the next generation of American weapons. After the war, the United States set out to build what the bar could never be, a true belt-fed squad machine gun with a quick-change barrel. The result in time was the M60, a general-purpose machine gun that fed from a belt, sustained fire the way the MG-42 had, and swapped its barrel when it ran hot. The M60 replaced the bar in American service, and where the bar fell silent every 2 seconds, the M60 could talk for as long as the belt ran. The story did not end there. The Army still wanted automatic firepower at the lowest level, a weapon for the individual fire team. And in 1982, it adopted the M249 squad automatic weapon, the SAW, a light belt-fed machine gun with a quick-change barrel, carried and fired by one man. In a sense, the SAW was the weapon the bar had always been asked to be and never could. Belt-fed instead of 20 rounds, quick-change barrel instead of a fixed one. The squad automatic weapon done right at last, built on the hard lessons that bar gunners had paid for in Normandy and the Ardennes and a dozen Pacific islands. That is the legacy of the Browning automatic rifle. Not failure in the way we usually mean the word, something more complicated and more human. The bar was the weapon that taught the United States Army what a squad automatic weapon actually needed to be, by being almost, but not quite, that weapon for 40 years and across 3 wars. Every belt-fed, quick-change barrel the American infantryman has carried since owes a debt to the gunners who fought with 20 rounds in a barrel that could not be changed. So what do we make of it, this icon that was also a misfit? We hold both truths at once, the way the men who carried it did. The bar was a masterpiece of design and a tactical compromise on the front lines. It was beloved by the soldiers who trusted their lives to it and ill-suited to the role their doctrine demanded of it. It was reliable when it mattered and silent when it was needed most. It was in the end the right weapon for a war that had already ended in 1918, asked to fight the wrong way in the war that came after. And maybe that is the most honest lesson of all. Weapons do not fail in the abstract. They fail when we ask them to be something they were never made to be. And then it is not the steel that pays the price. It is the man behind it. He lies in a Normandy hedgerow with an empty gun and a German machine gun rising to answer the silence. He is brave. He is doing everything right. And the weapon in his hands, magnificent as it is, simply cannot do what his country has asked of it. That man deserves to be remembered, not as a footnote in a debate about magazines and barrels, but as a soldier who carried the heaviest weapon in his squad into the worst places on earth and asked it to do the impossible, and never once put it down. That was the bar, an icon of engineering, a compromise on the line, and a story worth telling the way it really happened. If this is the kind of history you came here for, the truth behind the weapons, the men, and the legends, then subscribe, give this video a like, and ring the bell so you never miss the next story. There are more of them coming, and every one of them is real.